Joe Biden sent out a very serious warning about the nuclear threat that is posed by Putin. And so we'll take a look at that moment in a second, but first, an MSNBC correspondent kind of breaking down what has pushed Putin, or what reasons Putin is now so openly floating the idea of using tactical nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine. So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at Biden's warning.
I think all of us ought to be concerned. Look, the Ukraine situation clearly has teed up a confrontation in which poor Mr. Putin is watching the wheels come off the Russian army. They are a disaster. Stupid generals, indisciplined, brutal battalions. His call up of 300,000 conscripts, arguably he'll get less than 25%. More than 300,000 have fled the country. International political pariah, the economy is going to tank probably permanently. And so into that environment, he's articulating publicly, which is unheard of, a rational argument for employing nuclear weapons. It's illogical. Putin knows full well you cannot fight a strategic nuclear war and survive. If we allowed the Russians to use a unimpeded first strike on the United States, the resulting counterattack by U.S. Navy boomer submarines would put 950 nuclear weapons into Russia and end it as an organized society. So none of this language makes any sense. I don't think it's logical to think we're going to face it.
Okay, so he has the belief that this is all posturing, which is obviously what we all are hoping for, that it is just posturing. But he did very aptly break down why this is being something that Putin is floating. And it's because he's seeing the failings of his military. He's seeing the gains of the Ukrainian military on the ground. And he's starting to feel desperate. This may have all been a massive failure on his part. And so he's getting really desperate, and he might be trying to use the rhetoric around nuclear weapons as a means of acquiring more, at least, aesthetic power in the eyes of his people and in the eyes of foreign countries, so that he's taken more seriously, or something to that end. Wow. But then Biden had a different sentiment. He wasn't saying, no, this is just posturing. He warned of Armageddon. Holy smokes, reading from The Guardian. Joe Biden has warned the world could face Armageddon if Vladimir Putin uses a tactical nuclear weapon to try to win the war in Ukraine. The U.S. president made his most outspoken remarks to date about the threat of nuclear war at a Democratic fundraiser in New York, saying it was the closest the world had come to nuclear catastrophe for 60 years. We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, he said. We've got a guy I know fairly well, Biden said, referring to the Russian president. He's not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons, because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming. So he identified there the similar root cause of why Putin is all of a sudden escalating his rhetoric so much, even though he's been floating this a lot throughout his time. But or he likes to remind people of the nuclear strength of Russia to make himself seem strong and all that type of stuff. But he's escalating it and using very specific language to make that threat. And so Biden sees that and says he's not joking about the threats that he's making. Very different analysis than that MSNBC former general correspondent. And I don't know which one is the case, but it's one of those situations where it doesn't matter. Either way, you have to treat it the same. You have to understand the massive threat that is posed by having someone in power in this country, speaking of Russia, who is willing to even use that language. That is a threat of its own, to be willing to use that language, because, as everyone agrees, when nuclear weapons start getting involved, you threaten a whole heck of a lot more. There's so much damage and carnage being done right now in Ukraine. But the idea of nuclear weapons happening as well is horribly terrifying and could cause a global situation to erupt, which again would be Armageddon would be a nuclear catastrophe that we would not want to live through, and most of us wouldn't. That's such a sad statement I just made. Holy smokes. But you get the point. Wild stuff going on, and a stark warning there from Joe Biden.